Hello, and welcome to Continuing Clockwise, a channel about games, gamers, and gaming. I'm Chad. So for as long as I've known that Rangers were a playable class in Dungeons & Dragons, I've had some particular ideas about what the archetypical Ranger should be about, and that's all the way back from when I was 10 years old. I first became aware of Rangers just at all at around that age, when it was first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons had come out, and that was where the Ranger class first appeared. And a few things of note about the first AD&D Ranger was that they had to be good aligned, they couldn't travel, they didn't like to travel in groups, so usually only 3 or fewer Rangers could travel together. They couldn't keep treasure or belongings beyond what they could carry, and they could track, and they had some skills at woodcraft. Now, the word Ranger also had some other connotations for me at that age. Mostly, as a kid living in a rural community in the early 80s, my father worked for the United States Forest Service. And in that context, Rangers were literally a job title. The word Ranger often refers to 2 different types of professions. The first is a park or forest ranger, and those can be found in many parts of the world, specifically, of course, North America, like I'm referencing. Also, Asia and Africa all have examples of rangers. And their list of responsibilities includes law enforcement, education, emergency response, and general maintenance of the parks or the lands that they're in charge of. And they often are supporting or directly doing scientific activities. Very often, park rangers are fighting against poachers. And I'll put a link just to the Wikipedia article about park rangers down in the comments. The other kind of person that ranger often refers to is in a military setting. And historically, rangers, I think back in the colonial period or even before, were the soldiers who patrolled between fortifications. In the U.S. Army, rangers are light infantry soldiers who often perform long-range reconnaissance, ambushes, they take airfields, and they do ambushes and raids. I'll put a couple links for my sources in there as well. There's not a whole lot. This isn't my academic rigor is not deep, but I'm also, not trying to make anything up. Now that we have a shared general understanding for what rangers are, let's look at some specific examples and talk about them. What roads would any dare to tread? What safety would there be in quiet lands or in the homes of simple men at night, if the Dunedain were asleep or were all gone into the grave? Simple folk are free from care and fear, simple they will be, and we must be secret to keep them so. That has been the task of my kindred, while the years have lengthened and the grass has grown. Aragorn, son of Arathorn. And that's probably all the Tolkien we need to talk about for this particular episode. The first clip I'm going to show you is from a show from the 1970s called The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams. There was also a movie, and the movie was based on a book, and the book was based on a historical figure of some kind, though I think most of it is fictionalized.
What'd he say? He said he just came through here. He said more than that. I heard him. He said that when it runs, it makes tracks like he's never seen before.
Well, a bear could have done this.
In order for a bear to do that, he'd have to be full-growed. And a full-growed bear would have left claw marks. And there ain't none.
Then we're just going to go find out what did do it.
There's your prints.
They look like they're fresh ones.
Now, if you want my advice, Adams, we'll go back to the cabin and wait for it to show up there. That is, if it ever does.
Jack, I'm telling you, there ain't no monster out here.
Oh, of course. There's no weird monster. The birds are jumping out of their feathers, 3-toed tracks from no critter that's ever been in these parts, and a banshee howl, and branches broke off of trees with no claw marks. Ugh. Of course there's no monster.
And I know there's got to be a reasonable answer for it.
I just can't wait to hear it.
Tacoma, stay with Ben and Jack. I'm going on up ahead.
Well, stop.
All right. Whatever you are, I'm coming in to meet you. I mean you no harm. Jack? Tacoma?
Oh, jumping squirrel fish. It's a... What in tarnation is that?
So all 3 characters that we just saw, I believe, would be included in the ranger category. So we have Nakoma, who was the American Indian, Mad Jack, who's really the classic stand-in for the mountain man figure of the American West, and then Grizzly Adams himself. And, we see him with his animal companion, who didn't show up too much in that clip, but that grizzly bear and he have a really special relationship, which is really cool, and a perfect example for those with animal companions. As an aside, the way they work together to track that camel is a great example of an assisted skill check. Now, in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, any help or assistance just gives you advantage. So the third character that helps doesn't give you another mechanical bonus, but, that's okay. It's still interesting. Also, in this case, we see the three of them working together, but in the context of the show, they really all three have their own agendas, their own lives, and they spend a lot of time apart. Nakoma lives with his own people. Mad Jack is, as a mountain man and a trapper, he spends a lot of time checking his traps and just wandering the mountains and kind of going back to civilization and back and forth. And then, of course, Grizzly Adams, the idea in this show is that he's actually on the run because he's a wanted criminal. So he kind of has to stay put in his cabin. But, and this is important, when there's a monster, when they think there might be a monster, or they don't know what that camel is, right? They come together. There's a sense of shared responsibility for what's happening in the wilderness. We also see them all using their woodcraft skills, their tracking skills. They all are very comfortable in that wilderness by now. I have to confess, as I was preparing for this video, I was a little concerned about how Nakoma would show up. I remembered him, as a figure, and I liked him at the time, but I was just glad to see that the character was treated with respect, at least in this episode. It would have been even better if we could understand what he was saying, and he could have a voice of his own. But at least in this episode, I appreciated the way he was represented. There's a movie with Robert Redford called Jeremiah Johnson that also illustrates life as a mountain man. It's, for more mature audiences, I think it's probably R-rated. So if this is something that's kind of interesting to you, but the family-friendly nature of Grizzly Adams isn't quite up your alley, you might want to check out Jeremiah Johnson for another view on what ranger life might have been like in the American West. The next example I want to look at is Sergeant Elias Grodin from Oliver Stone's Platoon. Before we get too deep into this example, I just want to say, at this point in my life, war movies of any kind really are almost unwatchable for me, frankly. Because they so focus on the American experience. And while it's great and important to understand what American soldiers have experienced and had to suffer from when they go fight wars in faraway lands, almost all of these movies minimize or just don't spend much time at best dealing with the suffering of the civilians there. While this is a big problem, it's out of the scope of this video, so we can move on. And having said that, this character really is still very interesting, and I want to take a look.
They're coming. Stagger yourself across this line. Shoot anything that moves. They'll be coming from over there. Any one of them gets through, you're truly fucked.
Where the hell are you going?
Down by the river, about 100 meters. In case they try to flank us. Third platoon's coming up to our rear, so watch for them.
Hey, can I go with you?
No. We'll move faster alone.
So just in that short clip, we see him illustrate some attributes that are becoming thematic. He exhibits real care for the group. He's watching out for everybody. Now, that is his job as a sergeant in the army. Those people all report to him. But still, he seems to actually genuinely care about what's happening. He's really comfortable reading the ground and the land around him. And then at the end, there's that comment that he's faster alone. Why, that's the reason he says why he doesn't want Charlie Sheen's character to follow him. And that's a really rangery thing. At the same time, it's not a very soldierly thing. Typically soldiers don't like to travel alone. Typically soldiers are in groups. They function better as a team. They're trained to be a team. And then notice how comfortable he was at the end of the clip after he'd shuffled off all of his excess gear and was about to leave to go on his own. That's an interesting connection with back what I'd mentioned from the first edition Player's Handbook, where Rangers aren't supposed to have much stuff. They're not supposed to have a lot of treasure and wealth and loot. They often are characters who travel very light, just like Sergeant Elias Grodin does, at the end of that clip. Finally, let's take a look at who might be my favorite ranger in modern pop culture. Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead. Now, I'm going to be talking about really Walking Dead, the TV show. I'm not nearly as familiar with the comic. I know they're very close in a lot of ways, but not the same. So I just wanted to, name that up. Just to set you up for this first clip, one of the group's children, Sophia, had become lost in a recent episode with the Walkers. And so Daryl is out looking for her.
Whoa. Sophia! Oh, easy.
So even though Daryl, especially at this point, but it's just his nature is often surly and seems really angry at everything, he's the one who is still out there looking. He's still searching for her, even while the rest of the group is back at camp. I actually can't remember what their camp life was like at this point in the show. But anyway, they're back recuperating, getting their energy, and he's out still at it. This second clip is from season 5, so a lot of time has passed. I think it's late season 5, in fact. The group has been on the road for a long time. They're exhausted. They're out of water. They're short on food. And, let's just take a look. And here's another example. When the chips are down, Daryl is the one who is out by himself, still at it, still searching in the wilderness, trying to help his friends. For Daryl, we see that he strongly values supporting the group, helping the group. And I think this really demonstrates his, chaotic good alignment for most of the show. There are times and circumstances where we see him change, and I think more to a chaotic neutral. And that's a big deal worth paying attention to. And that's part of one of what I think makes him great as a character, is that we see him change and even fight against that as he gets into kind of darker phases. Just to call out from both clips, we saw him using his tracking abilities. We saw him using just general woodcraft. In the first video with the horse, he was using his animal handling skills, and he must have botched a roll or something, and that's why he fell off and fell into the river. And even then, you wonder in D&D terms if he has a really high constitution. In both of these cases, the rest of the party, the rest of the group are not there because they're presumably too tired to keep searching, and so he's the one who still has the energy to push on. It seems likely to me that Daryl's creators gave him that crossbow in a way to try to actually connect him to being a ranger, to give him a visual connection to rangerdom. Part of what hope I'm showing here is that being a ranger is more than just being an archer. And in fact, the archery part of being a ranger is very secondary. As an aside, one of the reasons I love The Walking Dead is that it maps so well onto Dungeons and Dragons. In those first seasons, when it's a low-level group, many of them don't even know how to use their weapons. And then later on, as they get hardened and they all just become like this elite group of, tightly focused survivors, they clearly have more hit points than these other non-player characters, supporting characters who they encounter. After reviewing park rangers, military rangers, mountain men from the American West, and some other people who were inhabiting the American West, as represented by Grizzly Adams and his friends, Sergeant Elias Grodin, and Daryl Dixon, a few themes really emerge about what rangers have in common. Everyone was skilled in tracking in woodcraft of some kind, and were really comfortable in their outdoor environments. It wasn't explicitly talked about a whole lot, in the bits that we saw, but there was a suggestion that they were also uncomfortable in urban settings. All of these characters had a concern for those around them, for those under their protection. They all had this guardian element to their personalities. And they all kind of liked to be alone, which was in tension with the fact that they did have friends. They did have a connection to larger groups. They did have a connection to the world around them. I hope this video has helped you think about Rangers, especially if you're considering creating one to play in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. What do you think? When someone says Ranger, what characters do you think about? Do you have opinions about the examples that I provided? I would love to hear about that all in the comments. If you like this video, please click the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. And until next week, game great.